course, it's not very far. Only about 15 minutes from Rogers out to Hobbs State Park. I'm going to share a little bit of history about the park as well, especially as it ties into our forest resources. So there's some really interesting history and connections with Rogers and some of the folks that have lived here in the past, okay? So I called this Forest Forever, Understanding and Appreciating a Vital Part of Our Ozark Heritage. How many of you have lived most of your life in what we would call the Ozarks? I'm curious, how many people, would you consider yourself a native Ozarkian? All right, a few. I saw a few hands up. So, of course, we know that this area continues to draw people from all parts of the country, all parts of the world, really. It's such a great place to live and to work and to play here in Northwest Arkansas. And I'm just really thrilled to get to be a part of that with my job as a park interpreter at Hobbs State Park-Conservation Area. So here's an aerial view of this area. We've got Rogers over here in the light green color, and Prairie Creek and 12 Highway. So if you take 12 Highway out, go across the Prairie Creek Bridge, across that section of the lake, and then everything that's in that red bordered area, that is all Hobbs State Park. We're the largest state park in Arkansas, over 12,000 acres. And so it is a large amount of land. It's not all contiguous. There are some areas that are kind of disjunct, especially you get out to the east. That would be on the right side of the screen. You can see there's some little red boxes out there. So we are, though, the main part is all contiguous. You can see there around 12 Highway. You can see how far it goes down, almost down to the bottom of Lowell. That red box right down here. All right, so yeah, we're a big chunk of land, and we're protecting this little part of the Ozark Forest in Northwest Arkansas. So here's our mission. I think it's really important that people understand, well, just what are we about? What are we supposed to be doing? Why does Hobbs exist? As you can see, that mission statement, we're a conservation area and state park that provides enriching educational and recreational experiences in harmony with resource stewardship. So we are there providing a service to everybody in this area. We have over 54 miles of trails, so a lot of trails to get out and explore. That's our main draw. But also, it's our responsibility to be good stewards of those resources, to make sure that for many generations to come, Hobbs State Park is going to represent a healthy piece of the Ozark Forest, and that people can still enjoy. We actually have sub-themes, or sub-mission statements, if you will. The resources that we have that we're charged with taking care of, and so this one speaks specifically to the forest. With care, the balance of nature in this forest can provide opportunities for inspiration and wonder. And it's at this point that I was going to have you all read some quotes, some famous quotes about forests and trees. And what did I go off and forget in my rush to get out the door? I forgot my quotes, but I'm sure that you all can look up famous quotes about trees. John Muir, most of you probably are familiar with who that is. Some of the other famous authors from the past have also written amazing, they've got these great quotes about the value of forest and the importance of them. So I want you to think about that. This was a photo that I took here not too long ago, actually. It was a foggy morning, and I'm pretty fortunate. I get to live at the park in park housing, and so that is right out my front door. Not bad, huh? So also, how many of you are familiar with Vivaldi's The Four Seasons? That piece. Yeah, I feel like I should have that. I need to get permission probably to play that, but I want to take you through the 4 seasons of the forest at Hobbs. So what season is this?
Spring.
Spring. Look at the new green leaves that are popping out on the trees. Very much like now. I'm not sure, I think this was probably taken maybe in early April, this photo here, but trees everywhere. Hobbs is very heavily forested. And here's another shot of spring. That sun is returning, the plants are responding, putting out their green leaves. Our forest is mostly what we call a deciduous forest. So you may know that term. That means that they lose their leaves seasonally. So during the winter months, most of these deciduous trees are bare. And now we move into summer. And so the leaves are at their full potential, full growth, taking that sunlight, making food for that plant, storing that food. It's kind of at its peak. And so this is a summer shot of the forest. This is actually taken on Shattuck's Hollow Trail. If you have been out there before, if you haven't, it's a wonderful trail. You should experience it. And then into fall. And of course, that's when I think our Ozark forests are at their most beautiful point with all the fall colors, those deciduous trees and shrubs and other plants turning their brilliant reds and golds and yellows, orange, even maroon. There are some of the leaves that are a dark purplish color. Another shot of a nice path in the fall. Doesn't that make you want to just go wander down that path? Yeah, that's what we hope anyways. We do get lots and lots of visitors. Right now with spring break starting in other states, next week is Arkansas spring break, but already we've seen a real increase in visitation due to spring break. And then those trees lose their leaves, and so for some people they might say, yeah, winter. This is my least favorite time of year. But there are some really good things about winter and exploring the forest at that time of year. For example, without all the leaves on the trees, you can truly see a lot of the shapes of the trees. Look at this amazing tree and how it's bent. And I really regret not having those quotes because there's a great one that I love that talks about, not all the trees are perfect in the forest, and neither are we. So, we have our blemishes and our scars and stories, and so do these trees. Here's another one. Some of the oaks and hickories, the deciduous trees, they often don't grow the straightest or the tallest. They'll have these past scars, limbs that have died and fallen off. You can see here, does anybody know what that's called on a tree, this big rounded area?
Burl.
A burl, yeah. That's called a burl. And we'll talk more about those and the importance of trees, even dead trees here in just a second. And then we get into winter. And while we don't get a lot of snow in this area, when it does come, those first few days are just absolutely gorgeous. The snow covering the hills, covering those trees. Just a beautiful scene, this one as well. But the other reasons why I like to be out in the forest during the winter is because then it's not as hot, it's much more comfortable. Summers in Arkansas, if you've lived here any length of time, you know what that's like. Very hot, very humid. So the winter is a great time to get out and explore the forest, even though maybe you don't see a lot of those leaves. You also don't have all the insects, all the pests to contend with in the winter months like you do in the summer. So what does the forest mean to you? So if anybody is interested in sharing, so I'm not here just to talk at you, but I would love to hear some of your thoughts, your comments, maybe memories, connections, or how you value trees and forests. Would anybody like to volunteer and share with the group? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
I'd like to share.
Yes, please.
So I'm from Miami, Florida, and what we have there is a lot of beach, like the water, the sun, and I always wanted to be in a place where there's a lot of trees. And coming here, I do a lot of hiking. I love hiking everywhere, just be in nature, and it brings me peace. I see God's creation, how amazing He is, and I just love Northwest Arkansas because of the trees and the forests.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else like to share? Yeah, you can applaud. That's okay. Anybody else who would like to share? Oh, yes, back here. Yeah.
Not necessarily about this forest, but about trees in general. There was a oak where I grew up, and it was my cousins and I would play around it. It would take 5 of us to surround it. And I remember being in college and going away and coming back after Katrina, and it was gone, and I cried so hard. All my family and I stood around, and because I was the only one who hadn't seen it, that it was missing. When we drove up, I was thinking something's wrong, and I was like, oh, the tree, and that's what we called it, the tree. And it was just amazing how that can just affect you. So
it's amazing the connections that we can develop with trees, and even from a very, very young age, how special they are. Climbing trees, I have very fond memories of doing that as a child. Let's see, I think you had your hand up.
I just wanted to share how much I love trees. In my home, you walk in, there's a big stick, branches, flower arrangements, sticks. I've got dead leaves, beautifully arranged on a limb, which is on display. So I'm a freak for trees.
That is okay. In fact, I love to hear that.
My memory as a child is we had a lot of apple trees. We had a cherry tree, that you could climb up, and we'd climb up that tree and just eat till our tummies hurt, So I remember, fruit trees and that kind of thing as a child.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Don't want to leave anyone out. Well, we will go ahead and continue. I'll just real quick, something that I can relate, share with you all. So I worked, before coming here to Hobbs, I lived in Joplin. And so I was actually working at a nature center in Joplin when the tornado went through there. And so the nature center staff, we all were, kind of like, what can we do to help the community to rebuild, to heal, to repair? And we said, we can help people get trees back in their yard, because I cannot tell you how many people I spoke to that had lost their homes, and they were just as upset about the loss of the trees. That was oftentimes one of the very first things they mentioned was, I can rebuild my home. I can't replace these huge towering oaks and other trees. And so we worked with the Missouri Department of Conservation and some other folks to offer them free trees that they could replant. Of course, that it's going to take a lot of years to grow back up, but at least we felt like we played some small role in helping them to feel better and to move forward after that horrific event there. These next few slides are mostly information, so bear with me as we cover a few of the facts. So in my professional world of interpretation, we talk about the mind and the heart. So the intellectual part, the facts, that's appealing to the mind. What we just did was more about the heart and the emotions that we have, the connections we have with nature. And you really need both to make an impact. So just how important are forests in Arkansas? Well, they're approximately 56% of the state. You can see this next fact there, that really only about 19-20% roughly is public publicly owned. By far, the majority of forested land in Arkansas is privately owned. And Arkansas is very dependent on the timber industry. It's a large part of our economy. We may not see that so much here in northwest Arkansas, although I do see logging trucks going down the highway with mostly hardwoods, oaks and hickories, things like that, strapped to them, going to the sawmill. But especially if you're down more in southern Arkansas, where they have the large pine plantations. However, I will propose that a tree plantation is not a forest. It's very, very different from a forest. So it's huge, the forest industry here in Arkansas. Did you know there were 160 species of trees just in our state? 160 species, but 15 of those have been introduced. In other words, they're not native. They were brought here by humans. But there's 750 species in the continental U.S. And don't quote me on this, but I believe it's something like in 1 acre of tropical rainforest, you can probably find 750 species. That's how diverse the tropical rainforests are in the world. Anybody know our state tree? Yes, it's right there. The pine is our state tree. Well, that's not very specific because there are actually 4 species in Arkansas. You can see them listed there. The only one that we have native to this region of Arkansas is the shortleaf pine. Of course, if you look at my shoulder patch here, the pine tree is part of our Arkansas State Parks logo. But all 4 of those are what in the timber industry they would just qualify as yellow pine. If you talk to somebody who knows their lumber, they're just all yellow pines. We are in the Ozark Highland ecoregion, and there the forest is predominantly oak hickory or oak hickory pine. And at Hobbs, we have a mix of all of those. You can see there, the next fact, oaks and hickories make up 65% of the forest at Hobbs, and then 30% is the shortleaf pine. So that leaves only 5% for all the other species. So definitely oaks and hickories dominate our forests. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but I just want you to take a look. The importance of trees. They're the obvious things that trees provide us, but probably most people are not aware of how many products can be made from just the trunk, the pulp, the saps, gums, and resins, and the bark of various species of tree. It's huge. So many things. I didn't realize how many things like rayon, cellophane, even some plastics, they also have their roots in that pulpwood from the trees. Amazing, isn't it? How many things we've been able to figure out we can make from that resource. So here's where we get into the benefits. So as I was saying, it's obvious there are some benefits. The wood, and then that list of forest products we just saw. Food, your cherry trees, your pear trees, all the fruits, nuts, also, of course. And I deal a lot with elementary school kids, and I could ask them, why are trees important? And I can tell you the number one answer I almost always get from them is, they give us oxygen. And that's fantastic. I'm so glad that they have learned that they know that. But here are some other things, some other benefits that forests provide us. And oftentimes an ecologist, they might put these into a category called ecosystem services. So we know what services are, and typically they're things we pay for. Forests are providing these things for free. And the benefits are huge, they're enormous. Reducing air pollution, absorbing the greenhouse gases like CO2 that are creating our climate change. Reducing the heat island effect in urban settings. You can easily tell the difference. You're in town on a summer day and it's gonna be probably 5, maybe 10 degrees warmer in town than it is out at Hobbs because of all the concrete and asphalt. They have done numerous studies, and they found that just planting trees in urban areas can make a big difference in lowering that temperature. They also, cool buildings as well. So another impact of them, which means a lower electric bill for us to pay. They help to slow down that rainfall runoff, and they reduce erosion with their root systems. They filter pollution from the runoff. They help to recharge the groundwater supply. Obviously, they provide habitat for wildlife, which we're providing for them out at Hobbs. And then all the outdoor recreation and tourism benefits as well of having forests. So just a shameless plug, since the state parks are a part of the Arkansas Department of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism. So we're all lumped together in that one agency. So obviously if we don't have visitors, we would be a preserve, we would be providing habitat, but we are there for the people of Arkansas and from all other parts of the country too. So tourism is now a $9.2 billion industry in Arkansas. 48.3 million people visited Arkansas in calendar year 2022, which was the last statistic I could find. And over 8 million people visit Arkansas State Parks annually. And I'll add that the great thing about Arkansas State Parks is it's free to come into the park. We don't charge anybody anything to go hike and explore the forest. I'm getting ready to go visit Texas. No offense to anyone here from Texas, but yeah, I was kind of amazed at how much it costs just to go into a state park in Texas. So there are states where it is not free to even just go into those parks. So let's talk about the people in the forest, and especially the connections with Hobbs. So the gentleman you see on the left there, his name is Peter Van Winkle. How many of you have ever heard of the Van Winkle Mill or heard of Peter Van Winkle? Awesome, yes. Our history museum in Rogers, they have some great exhibits. They also talk about Hobbs and the history link there. But Peter Van Winkle was one of the first to build and settle in the area that is now Hobbs State Park. And you can go there, you can hike the Van Winkle Trail. It's a short half-mile trail that's ADA accessible, very easy to do, and you can see the area where he lived and where he had a thriving sawmill business. And so he was actually born in 1812 in New York City. And he came here, I believe it was the 1840s, 1850s. He lived in Fayetteville for a while. But eventually he wanted to get into the lumber business. And so he purchased a large tract of land in what is now Hobbs State Park. He built the first steam-powered sawmill in this region. And at one time in the 1870s, it was the largest steam-powered mill in the entire state of Arkansas. And so he had this land where he could harvest the trees, mostly pines. So pines grow straight and tall. They're great for lumber, for building houses, building buildings, all kinds of things. So he was mostly interested in harvesting the pines. And this is the house that he ended up building there in Van Winkle Hollow. Unfortunately, none of these structures are left, but there are the foundations. There were archaeological digs that were done on these sites. So a lot of what we learned came from the University of Arkansas and the Archaeological Survey, who did extensive work out there. So Peter Van Winkle was one of the first. Of course, long before him, the Native American peoples that lived in this region would have utilized the forest and its resources. even some of the people from the Trail of Tears that came through and lived in this region, they also would have used the forest. But Peter Van Winkle was one of the first that decided to settle there and make a living. This is a photo of the Van Winkle Mill. This was probably taken in the 1880s, around that time. It was quite large and produced a whole lot of lumber out of the hills of what is now Hobbs State Park. By about, I think it's 1889, most of the valuable timber was already cut and gone, and so the mill closed. I think it was in 89. How did they get those logs to the mill? Well, by mule. So you can see these mules with wagons hauling those logs. Got a nice dog down here in the foreground. That guy standing up there on that log. I don't think OSHA would approve of that. Looks a little risky up there, but so Peter Van Winkle, he owned lots of mules, lots of wagons. So once you cut those trees, you had to get them to the mill where they could be cut, and then it didn't end there. You had to get them to a place where people could easily purchase them. And so he had a lumber yard actually in Eureka Springs. He is responsible for building a lot of the roads that we still use today that have become even our highways. Peter Van Winkle is responsible for building a lot of those. Who knows what this building is? Go ahead and say it if you know it. U of A, Old Main, that's right. Did you realize that most of Old Main was constructed from wood from Hobbs, what is now Hobbs State Park? Yeah, it was Peter Van Winkle's lumber mill and his lumber that went into building Old Main. After the Civil War, when during Reconstruction, much of Eureka Springs, Bentonville, and of course Fayetteville, the oldest community in this region, they all were built primarily with lumber from Hobbs. So really important to the history of our region. Peter Van Winkle died, I believe it was in 1882, and interestingly enough, this gentleman here, you see on the screen, his name is Roscoe Hobbs, our namesake. He was born in 1880, so pretty close to the same time when Peter Van Winkle actually died. And Roscoe Hobbs, he was a Bentonville boy. That's where he was born and raised. Very meager beginnings, poor family, and he got an 8th grade education, and after he finished the 8th grade, he had to go to work to help support his family. But he got into the railroad business. He worked from the ground up, every job you can imagine in the railroad industry, lots of manual labor, and eventually he had an interest in selling lumber. Because of course, what's the tie between railroads and lumber? The tie. Yeah, no pun intended. You got to have railroad ties to build a railroad. And so he purchased, at first, it was about 8,000 acres of what now is Hobbs State Park. And he created a lumber company. And I'm going to forget or mix up the name. It was, I think, Ozark Rail and Tie Company. Don't quote me on that. But he at first was buying lumber, logs that individuals would cut from their private property, and they'd bring the logs in, and he would sell them. Oftentimes these logs were hand-hewn. So yeah, a tie hack. That, talk about a hard job. That is not a job I would want, having to hack those ties out of a log. And so that was at the very early beginnings, and it continued to grow, his business, and he purchased more land, and eventually he ended up being the railroad tie king of the whole United States. That's what he's referred to as in some of the literature. Biggest railroad tie company in all of the United States. So he had depot, I guess you'd call it. He had a station right where the Harps grocery store is now. So right there along the railroad tracks, that is where his logs would have been hauled from the mill. We're talking late 1920s through the 1930s, the 1940s, also the early 50s, before by that time much of the valuable timber had been removed from that tract. So he ended up moving his base of operations to St. Louis. There he became a really well-known philanthropist and community leader in the city of St. Louis. So he was really quite something, Roscoe Hobbs. So let's talk now a little bit more about the ecosystem. What is a forest? An ecosystem is the living and the non-living components all working together to make this system run properly, to function. And so I think it's important to understand, and remember I said earlier that a plantation, a tree plantation, is not a forest, because a tree plantation, most often than not, has all an even-aged planting of trees. So they're all the same age, they're all the same height, and you have nothing below them. Here you can see in a natural forest, you've got the canopy layer or zone. You've got this sapling zone, also sometimes called an understory. The saplings of those trees as they're growing up, but also trees that only get maybe 30, 40 feet tall. Not nearly as tall as the trees that form the canopy, which in our forest would have been mostly the oaks and hickories and those pines. And then you keep going down, and notice the arrow on the right hand side of the screen, the amount of light going down. Lots of sunlight up in the canopy, but when you get down to that ground zone or the ground layer, you have very little light that's actually able to penetrate down there. You've got that shrub zone, and you've got the herb zone as well, or the herb layer. So let's just take a quick peek. Here's, I think I showed that slide earlier. That was my summer shot of that oak canopy in all its glory with the trees fully leafed out. And oaks and hickories, of course, are flowering plants, and that's what you're looking at here. This is called a blackjack oak. And these are the flowers. So how many of you have seasonal allergies? Yeah, the spring can be, it's a beautiful time of year, one of my favorite times of the year, but I do have seasonal allergies too, like many of you. And so we can thank the pollen from a lot of these trees for those allergies. But yeah, that's what they look like, oak flowers. And then here's just another shot looking up towards that canopy. These happen to be mostly pines, a grove of shortleaf pine all these were taken out of Hobbs. So I mentioned earlier, pines, really easy when you're in the timber industry. They're a softer wood, of course. They grow tall and so straight, like you see here. So really great for making lumber. And then when we get down to the understory, here's one of the things we're most famous for. What flowers are those from? Dogwood, the dogwood trees. Yeah, we get lots of tourists, lots of visitors that come to this area because in the spring, usually around the first part of April, that's when the dogwoods are fully blooming and just look absolutely gorgeous out there in the forest. Other understory trees include the one on the left. That is not a pear tree. I'll talk more about that in a second. That is actually the serviceberry. Then I think probably most of you know what the one is on the right. Redbud, yeah. A lot of those planted in town. Yeah, we love trees so much. Yeah, what do? Well, one of the first things, we want to plant trees around in our yard or landscaping. Then moving down to the shrub layer, this is one that's blooming right now. This is spice bush. So wonderful fragrance to it. So all these different layers, the diversity that they add to the forest is what makes all the wildlife possible. And then here, this is also a spring shot. Most of that green you see covering the ground there, That is actually our wild huckleberry. So it's in the blueberry family, but that's the wild huckleberry growing there. Getting lots of sun. And then the herb layer, the soft green plants. All those others have woody stems, but then your herb layer, they're much softer, more tender. And so before the canopy gets all leafed out, you've got a lot of these plants living sometimes almost their entire life cycle in the span of just a couple of months, from popping up new green leaves to flowering to making seeds, and then setting those seeds, releasing them, and then they die back once that canopy gets fully leafed out and they don't get much sunlight. So I have to show, this is the mandatory wildflower pics. So I love wildflowers. I'm sure many of you do too. And these are two of my favorites that I picked. If they aren't already blooming, the one on the left should be any day now. That is called bloodroot. Beautiful flower, early spring, what we would call an ephemeral. So it being very temporary. It's gonna be finished blooming here in just probably a few weeks, and they'll be all done for the year. And then on the right, I bet you can tell what kind of flower that is. An iris. That is wild iris. They're very short, so they're not tall like the iris that we like to plant in our yards. And of course, our landscape plants, they have their origins in the wild plants. So not just the living trees and all the living plants are important in a forest, a healthy forest. Those dead trees also play a vital role. Dead trees provide homes for all kinds of wildlife. You can see the cavities that have been made by woodpeckers in these trees. And then, anybody recognize what this is? It's a dead tree. That tree is so dead, it has been dead for so long, it's crumbling. It's just deteriorating, but you can see where it fell, where it lay. And why is that important? Because it's recycling the nutrients. Those nutrients tied up in those trees are then being added back to the soil so that other plants can grow. So let's talk briefly about some of the threats. Here's a list of some of the threats that you can Google, you can find. This is kind of my take on it as well. But in Northwest Arkansas, because we are growing so rapidly, it's important that we do set aside some land that's protected. And we are so fortunate to have a 12,000 acre chunk of the Ozark Forest protected basically forever. So we'll always have that part of our heritage here. Invasive species, both plants and insects, are becoming a growing problem. We know that our climate is changing, whether we like it or not, and in many areas that means hotter and drier conditions, and that makes it tougher for trees. Grasses thrive in areas where it's hotter and drier, but most trees, they typically prefer it to be a little wetter and cooler. There are many diseases that we have that trees battle. Many of them are fungal infections. Insects such as the southern pine beetle, and these are exacerbated by climate change. Southern pine beetles used to only reach so far to the north. Well, when you've got milder winters and they can survive those milder winters, they continue to move further north to their limits. So we're seeing increased problems with insects like that. I don't know how to best describe it. This oak decline, this is the definition, a complex interaction of environmental stresses and pests. So it's all these factors working together that are causing many of our oaks to decline, starting to slowly die off. And scientists are still working on what the solution to that may be. Invasive species, just very quickly, at Hobbs and where I took those wildflower photos earlier, we constantly are battling this invasive plant. This is called garlic mustard, Japanese honeysuckle. And here is the scourge, the colliery pear, or Bradford pear, which, you know, nobody knew when, in fact, the forest industry, when they first came out with Bradford pears and made them available for landscaping purposes, they swore that they would not be able to reproduce. Well, guess what? They found out that over enough time, they are able to reproduce and spread. And so now, everywhere you go, you see Colliery pears or Bradford pears. And I'm so excited to see places like Fayetteville that has really taken this bull by the horns, and they are actually paying people to remove Colliery pears from their landscape. And many places are also giving out native trees. So a great substitute for a Colliery pear in your landscape would be that serviceberry. White, beautiful flowers in the spring, not invasive, not a problem. Yes?
Why is it invasive?
So it spreads. So what it does is it quickly spreads. It actually, and when it goes more wild, it has thorns, so not very great if you're an outdoors person and you like being out there. But yeah, they're taking over many forested regions just by their ability to reproduce quickly, and they keep their leaves longer than most other native species of trees. They're actually not that great for your yard too. Their wood is very soft, and so in windstorms and ice storms, they quickly split and will break. So yeah, we learn the hard way sometimes what works and what doesn't. So what are some solutions? Well, it begins with proper forest management. And of course, as the stewards of that public land, we, meaning the staff at Hobbs State Park, are doing what we can to try and help manage it properly. And prescribed fire and forest thinning are sometimes important management tools. It's something that people sometimes don't think about and might seem counterintuitive. You know, well, you're trying to grow a forest and trees. Why would you want to burn it? Why would you set fire? Why would you want to cut those trees and thin it? Well, when we look at how these systems naturally operate and the role that humans have played since the beginning of time, once we were able to control fire, humans learned that setting fire actually helps manage those landscapes much better. They did it for their own personal reasons, mostly to help attract game. Wild game would come back into those areas where they had set fires. So we need to do more of the prescribed fire and the forest thinning to get the forests back to the condition they were in traditionally. Planting native trees, but making sure that you follow that idea of the right tree in the right place. If you don't, then yeah, you can be asking for problems. We need to stop selling and spreading invasives. Some communities are really proactive at doing this, but in many places you can still go to a Lowe's, a Home Depot, or wherever, and you can buy Japanese honeysuckle. And we should not be selling these plants that are creating so much havoc in our natural ecosystems. And finally, getting a handle on climate change. We've got to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Planting trees, just real quick, this is a list. This came from a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it, Bringing Nature Home by this professor, Doug Tallamy. And so here, and why it's important about trees being able to support Lepidoptera, the butterflies and moths, those caterpillars are the primary food source for like 95% of all of our songbirds and most terrestrial birds. You don't have caterpillars, you're not going to have those birds. And we have seen a dramatic decline in bird species and the numbers of birds. So planting an oak, that is the best thing that you can do. Yes, it takes them a long time, but oaks provide the most food for the most species. And you can see that list going down there to pine. So that's the top 10, my top 10 list. One of the species that we have lost, who's ever heard of an Ozark chinkapin? Not a chinkapin oak, that is a different species. This is in the chestnut family. And so one of my coworkers, Steve Churchill, he is what I fondly refer to as the Lorax. He is out there doing everything he can to help this tree species, the Ozark chinkapin, that almost got wiped out due to the chestnut blight that got introduced from Chinese chestnuts that were brought over from Asia. So this is what their seeds look like. This is in a spiny burr, and like a chestnut has. And so we plant some of those seeds in these tubes. This is looking down at this wonderful little seedling that has grown up there, and eventually we get a plot of Ozark chinkapin trees. And this is our plot, and they do need more sun, especially when they're younger, when they're first growing. So we have an area that's been cleared, and this is our Ozark chinkapin plot. Fire management, just some real quick shots of how that's done. I actually have been through a wildland fire training program as well. In fact, just yesterday I was doing some of this. I said that I live in the park. Well, to protect the house, we lay down what's called a fire line, so that is blown free of all debris around the house at a safe distance. So, but we oftentimes don't get to burn inside that fire line. So yesterday I was able to get that done. And so that makes me sleep better at night. And this is the kind of fire that we want to see. So when people think of forests and fire, they think of California, they think of fires jumping from crown to crown, devastating, hugely destructive of property and lives. No, this is what we're talking about with a prescribed fire. It's low and slow. This creeps along the ground, consuming the dead leaf litter, small branches, things like that helps actually renew the forest ecosystem. If you want to learn more about what you can do to protect yourself, and now as we keep moving more and more into wild areas, and the ranchettes, as some people call them, you've got 3 to 5 acres of forested land and that you purchased, and then you put your house there, but you don't really do anything with it. Contact or go online and look up Firewise Communities USA, and this will have all kinds of information on how you can better protect your property, your investment. Here's just another slide that's showing the zones around the house, and so that hopefully you'll avoid what many people in California and other parts of the country have experienced. Just here recently, of course, we know the Texas Panhandle, the devastating fires there. Of course, that was grassland. National Arbor Day began on April 10th of 1872, and 1 million trees were planted. Can you imagine? They enlisted a lot of people at that time to help plant that many trees. And I love this quote from J. Sterling Morton, the founder of National Arbor Day. He said, "Other holidays look to the past, but Arbor Day proposes the future." Well, we have our own Arbor Day in Arkansas, and it's celebrated the third Monday of March, and that is next Monday. What is that, the 18th? Yes. Oh, it's your birthday. Congratulations. It was first celebrated in Little Rock in 1906. So I want you to think about how will you celebrate your Arbor Day. Maybe go for a hike out at Hobbs State Park, enjoy the forest. And we want to remind everybody that we welcome everyone to explore nature and connect with your state parks. So with that, we have time maybe for a few questions. I'd be glad to try and answer.
Tell me about some of the wildlife you have out there.
Well, pretty much everything that should be there.
Bears?
No, not a lot of bears, but there are a few. Mm-hmm. We don't see them. We mostly know that they're there because of trail cameras that we have put out in the park. Don't worry, we're not out there spying on people. But it does help us in a couple of key areas tell what kind of wildlife we have. So we have caught pictures of bears out there, and actually from some of our neighbors. So we have one neighbor right outside the park, a bear decided that it liked birdseed, and so it became a problem with their bird feeders. So real simple, they just had to take their bird feeders down for a while, and the bear left. Anybody else?
What is the best time to go hiking to see the trees with flowers and the flowers?
Well, actually, right now, the serviceberry and the redbud, you may have seen some in town, so yeah, they're really coming along fast and furious right
Which one
now.
is better to see that?
Oh, man. One of my favorites, and especially for the wildflowers, I should have mentioned that, is called Sinking Stream. It's right by the Van Winkle Trail. It's a half mile, it's easy, and that is one of our most diverse in terms of plant life. Yes?
Do you have any guidance in the winter when there's no leaves? It's easy, just talking about identifying trees, it's easier by the leaf, but when there's no leaves, it's difficult, just looking at the bark and whatnot, sometimes it's confusing.
You can use just the bark. You can also use the buds and the bud scars on branches, but definitely with the leaves on. That is the preferred time to identify the trees, yeah, with the leaves on. Yes?
Are all pear trees bad? I know there are different varieties of them, but some are a lot weaker than others.
So this one is specific. This is called the Bradford pear, also Colliery pear. We're not talking about like the typical fruit-bearing pear trees that we plant to get pears from. So these are different. Bradford pear or Colliery pear.
Can you explain when the park started and how it was tied to Hobbs? I mean, was it only his land or was there more land involved?
Sure, yeah, I can definitely tell briefly a little bit about that. So the park began in 1979. The basic story is what happened. Roscoe Hobbs, who died in 1965, in his will, he expressly wrote that he wanted that land, and it was not all 12,000 acres. We've added little bits to it since then, but the majority was there in the Hobbs estate. And so he expressed that he wanted it to remain together intact for conservation. Now, I have not been able to verify any of this, but I'm going to tell you what I've been told is that actually Roscoe Hobbs was ahead of his time. In a way, he was kind of a conservationist, which some people think, well, that's contradictory to going and cutting the lumber, cutting the trees. He did not believe in clear cutting the way most timber harvesting is done. He would do selective harvesting. And he also did not condone the use of herbicides and pesticides, chemicals. So if that's true, then that's pretty amazing that for that time period, he was already doing those two things to help protect the resource the best that he could. So he also expressed in his will that the state have first dibs at purchasing that land. Well, in 1979, when this all started to come about and happen, that's when it did become a state park. What happened was the state didn't have the money at the time. The Nature Conservancy, a fantastic nonprofit organization, they stepped in. That's what they do. They purchase land to protect it for conservation. The Nature Conservancy, they worked with local banks in this area and raised the money. And so they were able to purchase the estate. And then shortly after that, the state, of course, which operates slowly, they were able to get the funds to repay the Nature Conservancy. So that's kind of how it became a state park. At first it was Beaver Lake State Park. Many people don't know that. And then later the name was changed to Hobbs State Park. Now, I'm glad they did. Give some recognition to Roscoe Hobbs for his commitment. Well, thank you all very much for having me come. Thank you.